You're listening to GWP Live. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined once again by co host Jacob Fulmer, reporting out on breaking news happened just moments ago at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Another shooting. Jake, what can you tell us about this?
So we've got a few different things here that we're going to be covering in tonight's news segment here. So again, just for anybody who might have kind of missed the memo this evening, we don't have we didn't have a news segment that was covered in our weekly news. Our weekly news just covered the weather and sports segment for today because we had quite a few different breaking news stories that we wanted to cover in this live stream. So this live stream is basically just like our weekly news segment, just like you would see the first half of the weekly news. It's just like that, except it's live so that we can give you all the latest information. And the other purpose of it is because a lot of our news that we're covering today, they're not necessarily just relevant news stories, they're ongoing stories that are happening right now. So that's part of the reason for that. The other thing is that we may have two live streams that may start happening simultaneously. And so just kind of be ready for that. We have a severe weather live stream that right now is scheduled for 9 p.m. That might be pushed back as needed. We might not even have that live stream if necessary. This may be the only live stream that we have for this evening. So again, just kind of to clarify, and again, we are covering that breaking news story that came out just several hours ago out of the National Mall there, but we're also going to be touching on some other news stories that we would normally be covering in our news segments. That's kind of I guess, an overview of what we're going to be doing here in this live stream.
Absolutely, Jake. A number of different stories to get to, a number of different breaking news stories at that. And again, due to that absence this week, that absence tonight, in that weekly news segment, well, this can sort of serve as the substitute for that. So, again, a number of things, perhaps most pressing, Jake, as you mentioned to me just moments ago, there was a shooting, another one in Washington, D.C. Again, after this one we had happened very recently at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We've had another one, this one at the National Mall. What do we know about it?
Yeah, so just 9 days later, we had this. And so the Secret Service was involved in this. They wounded an armed man near the Washington Monument. We also know that a 15-year-old boy was also hit in the gunfire. And something else that had just happened is that the motorcade of Vice President J.D. Vance had just passed through the area shortly before this shooting had taken place. So the Secret Service shot and wounded an armed man Monday afternoon just south of the White House, as we mentioned, near the National Mall, in a burst of gunfire that also grazed that young 15-year-old boy that was in an area that was packed with pedestrians. That's according to the officials that were in the area. So we're obtaining this. That was from the New York Times recently releasing that article explaining that.
Absolutely. So, some major recent developments on that. This, another recent shooting in Washington, D.C. This one, of course, taking place at the National Mall. And contrary to the one that we had not long ago at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, unfortunately, that previous one didn't result in really any major injuries, casualties, certainly that we know of. Still an ongoing investigation, which you'll have to stay tuned for. GWP News weekly recap, and all of that for the latest developments on the ongoing investigation there. But again, what happened there? This, of course, was different from the recent shooting in as much as it was an indoor event. Again, we did have a one person shot in that incident. Again, one of the law enforcement agents there, though fortunately he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Unfortunately, though, Jake, we cannot say the same for this recent shooting that happened just today at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Again, we know that, unfortunately, a 15-year-old boy was injured by the gunfire. And again, not abundantly clear the details on that. I'd like to hear if you have any more detail on that exactly. You said that he was grazed. So, again, we've heard that before. Of course, we've heard in the past year, again, came dangerously close with a previous assassination attempt on President Trump. And many of the folks at home will have heard the term there again because it said that the bullet grazed his ear. Again, came very close to hitting him in the head. Is that a similar thing here, Jake, when you say that this bullet grazed this 15-year-old boy?
Yeah, so it's not entirely yeah, and so yeah, we don't necessarily know the exact details on that at this time.
Alrighty, so ongoing investigation on that. Still very much so. You will have to stay tuned for the latest
Yes.
details on
Yeah, and
that.
so we have a timestamp on that. It was at 3:30 p.m., so that would have been 2:30 here. So again, it was several hours ago near 15th Street and Independence Avenue, um, when the suspect again, and they're treating the victim, a teenage boy, 15 years old, with reports of a potential graze wound.
Okay, a potential graze wound. So could have been much worse. Again, not the most severe type of gunshot wound. Again, certainly could still be possibly. We know that he's being treated, so the boy is still alive. Very fortunately, could have been a lot worse. Again, if it had hit in a different spot, that could very easily have been a fatal shot. So again, thank goodness it was not. Again, it was only a graze wound, but again, still needing some treatment. Those still can be infectious wounds, different things like that. So certainly the boy and his family could use your prayers. That is about the latest on
Uh,
that. As for the
yes, it
recent
was
shooting,
lower
Jake.
body graze is what it. Yes, so it turns out that the child was struck by what appeared to be stray gunfire from the suspect and was treated for non-life-threatening injuries around the lower body. Again, it's a possible graze, so we're not entirely sure if the injuries from the boy were from the gunfire. And so that's something that's important to understand. Preliminary findings from the Secret Service suggest the bullet was fired by the suspect during a foot chase. The condition of the teenager as he was conscious and able to walk to a nearby ambulance before being transported to a local hospital for further treatment.
Absolutely. So again,
So,
very
and it appears that the White House was also in lockdown for about 5 to 10 minutes. Reporters and staff were confined to the press briefing room for about 5 to 10 minutes when this took place. Reporters on the North Lawn were ushered into the press briefing room by the Secret Service agents at approximately 3 to 4 or 3:41 p.m. And then the security alert was lifted within minutes, and authorities determined there was no direct breach of the White House grounds. Although the lockdown was short, an event hosted by President Donald Trump in the East Room started about 45 minutes late because of the shooting, so there was a delay from that. The other information that we know is that the suspect was not trying to attack anybody from the executive board, so we know that President Trump was never at risk of this gunfire and that he was not the primary target, as there wasn't really a primary target from the suspect.
absolutely. So possibly early on, again, that the indication at this point, again, that was not the intention. Not abundantly clear what the motives of the shooter were at this point. We will continue to follow the investigation on it that is ongoing. But again, Jake, as you mentioned, around this time, of course, the White House taking precautions, going under lockdown during this time. You did mention just a few moments ago that kind of around the time of the shooting that the vice president's motorcade was passing by. So again, that could have very easily, again, if the positioning had been slightly different, not abundantly clear how close by the vice president's motorcade was. But again, sort of mind boggling, again, in such a short period of time, just in the past years, how many events of this nature. And again, we've sort of talked about this very recently with the recent shooting at the White House Correspondents' Press Dinner. Again, this seems to be a pattern. Again, we've seen a number of different assassination attempts. Again, even assassinations in recent times. So, again, sort of cause for suspicion on that front would not entirely be without reason. We already know the president himself, President Trump, has received, again, a number of these assassination attempts. Not as much that we've heard of for the vice president, but again, that raises certain concern. The vice president's motorcade being quite nearby in the vicinity at the time of this shooting. So, Jake, you say that the investigation at this point indicates that the shooter did not have the intention of getting any of the top officials in the nation, president, vice president, secretary of state, anything like that. Do we know anything about what the shooter's motives were at this point, or it's probably still quite early on to say, isn't it?
Yeah, and it appears that it's possible that the suspect did not actually have the intention to cause this shooting to begin with in the first place. There appears to be a little bit of some speculation about that, although there are some possible charges that the suspect may be facing. Here's some of the charges that are being considered: assault on a federal officer, based on the fact that he was allegedly firing directly at the Secret Service during a foot chase. And so that's when this shooting took place. There wasn't any gunfire exchanged until the Secret Service was running at this individual. And so until the foot chase happened, there wasn't any gunfire that started. So that's kind of interesting about this case. It makes it a little bit different. We also know that he was illegally carrying a firearm within the district. And that is the original reason why the Secret Service was chasing him. If it wasn't for the fact that, this foot chase would not have happened, if the suspect wouldn't have been caught with the firearm. But the firearm probably wouldn't have been used if the foot chase wouldn't have happened. So it's one of those cause and effect type deals that we talk about here. And then another charge that he's likely to face is assault with a dangerous weapon, particularly because that 15-year-old bystander was grazed by the bullet. That, of course, will depend on whether or not that was actually what caused his injuries. As again, there are still some speculation as to whether or not the boy was actually injured by the bullet or whether or not it was from something else. Maybe it's possible that he was ducking for cover and that he was injured from that. And so it's possible that an argument might be made that that was the reason for this. As again, you mentioned that this comes following the April 25th shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner that is still scheduled, or is still set to be rescheduled. There was, of course, formal charges against Cole Thomas Allen, the shooter. That happened on April 27th, just the Monday following the Correspondents' Dinner that got rescheduled. On Monday, April 27th. There was 3 charges that came with that, which was, again, a similar case. We had, of course, attempted assassination on the president. That was one of the charges. Even though Trump was not in the direct line of fire, there is still that charge that he's been charged with. He's also been charged with discharge of a firearm during a crime of violence and interstate transportation of a firearm with intent to commit a felony. So those are the 3 different charges that Cole Thomas Allen that he is facing in that recent shooting that we had 9 days ago. That, of course, is very, kind of similar a little bit to what we saw take place earlier this afternoon. Obviously, there's a few differences that we've talked about in comparison to that. That was a lot more planned out. That was a lot more kind of a heightened security concern, where this was more something that took place outside the White House, didn't necessarily occur during a major event like the White House Correspondents' Dinner that we saw with the previous case. Well, it is now at the top of the hour here. This is GWP's Breaking News. We are live here at 9 p.m. to cover ongoing news on this Monday evening. And so again, lots of ongoing news. Again, this is kind of a replacement for our news segment here. Any new information that you have?
No, not any major new developments on that. Some important key distinctions, though, that you mentioned just moments ago. Of course, this, again, in reference to the recent shooting that we saw at the White House Correspondents' Press Dinner. Again, perhaps one of the most obvious differences here is this, of course, an outdoor event. You see considerably bit more risk when it comes to outdoor events. Of course, it's more difficult to control the air, different things like that. Again, that's not exactly something that came into question per se in this most recent shooting, but that is sort of one of the concerns that occurs in terms of the security measures taken at outdoor political events. And again, in light of recent events, that's certainly been discussed, of course, after recent assassination attempt. President Trump, at the time of his inauguration, well, that was an indoor inauguration, again, partly due to the recent threats that he had received. And again, so there's been some question raised. That, of course, we also saw recently, and of course, the widow of Charlie Kirk, Erica Kirk, was actually in attendance recently when we saw that shooting at the White House Correspondents' Press Dinner. So, again, must have been certainly, giving her background, a very jarring experience. So that an example of another outdoor political event. So again, it's been said that in light of recent events, that would sort of be the end of outdoor political events. And while this at the National Mall wasn't exactly a coordinated political event, it was another outdoor shooting. So certainly not the first of its kind, broadly speaking, that we've seen in recent times. And a couple of other kind of key distinctions that you mentioned on that, Jake. Some may have raised concerns about that. They say, oh, you say that the Secret Service was already going after this fellow, this suspect, this shooter, even before he started shooting. What were they doing that for? And again, as you mentioned, again, there was already probable cause for his arrest because they knew that he had an illegally obtained firearm. And again, we see so often suggestions. Again, many of these shootings had happened, many of them in recent times. Great tragedies, and they're of course naturally after the fact. Again, so many suggestions for different things that ought to be done about this in terms of policy and whatnot. But again, the fact of the matter is, in many of these incidents, so many of them we see the firearms are illegally obtained. So it's not as if they were obeying the existing regulations in place. So, again, an important distinction to make on that front. There's any question about it. Why exactly the Secret Service, why exactly the officers were already going after the suspect, going after the shooter? They had probable cause for his arrest because he had an illegally obtained firearm. Jake?
Yes, and so again, there's a lot of questions that are going to be raised about why did the Secret Service, I guess, start the shooting. But again, it has to do with the fact that there was heightened security around a previous event. And, I have to say, I don't necessarily think that the Secret Service would have, shot at this suspect if it weren't for the fact that we did have that White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting 9 days ago. That has made the White House be a lot more secure because recent events like that have happened. But again, it is important to understand they weren't just necessarily just shooting to shoot. They were shooting because somebody was breaking the law and appeared to have intention to cause harm. And so that is what happened. And so it's very important to understand that there was a serious threat, and whether or not something was actually going to happen or not, that is certainly something that's important to understand with that. So again, it's not necessarily just about whether or not somebody does harm. It's if somebody has the intent to do harm. And in this situation, we saw where the suspect did have intent to do harm. Whether or not they actually had done anything really didn't matter at that point. Well, that's pretty much all the information that we have on this recent shooting, but we have a lot of other really big news stories that have happened today. We'll get to a few different ones. One that's more local here in the city of Columbia, where the police phone lines actually went down because of some vandalism that occurred.
Because of some vandalism. So you say the police phone lines you mentioned to me moments ago, Jake. Again, 911 in your area again was not connecting with the actual emergency services dispatchers. And again, when you first mentioned this to me, Jake, I was somewhat shocked by it because again, all the modern technologies that we have again to be connected with 911 in the case of emergency services. I remember learning at a young age that again, even on a phone that didn't ordinarily have service, again, it was still possible to call 911 and contact emergency services. Again, many of the folks at home who have ever been in really dire circumstances or perhaps just noticed this as an option, well, you can be in an area with ordinarily poor phone signal and ordinarily is a dead spot and somehow still be able to be connected with emergency services. Again, sort of heightened coverage due to the dire nature of things. So again, quite shocking. But you say recently, where you are, Jake, in Columbia, Missouri, the police phone line, as well as again the emergency line, 911 were out of service. They just were not connecting. What can you tell us beyond that?
Yeah, so I remember I'll go ahead and give kind of a personal account of kind of the way that I found out about this. At around 4 a.m., my phone went off with a really loud notification, one of those emergency alerts that are issued from the government. Very similar to anytime you get an Amber Alert, a tornado warning, anything, any sort of like serious notification, a missing persons, anything like that, or sometimes it's like dangerous person armed or something like that. So you get get those emergency alerts when it's a local threat on your phone, as my phone disappears into the virtual background behind me. But and so I got one of those at about 4 a.m. So I got one of those alerts. I got another one around 8 or 9 o'clock, and they said that 311 also wasn't working as well. So it was an update. And so both of those lines were down. And it turns out that around 3 a.m., that Lumen Technologies, formerly CenturyLink, notified BCJC that a fiber fault was likely the cause of a service disruption and was impacting outbound emergency and non-emergency calls. And so again, this not only affected 911, but it also affected 311 as well. And so this also affected the University of Missouri's police lines as well. So MUPD was also affected. Their phone lines were down. What they said, so a public safety alert was sent out at 4:45. So that's the one that woke me up. And the public safety alert about phone complications said, if 911 does not connect, hang up and call again. That's what their recommendation was. And so that took place. MUPD sent out alert around 7:30. So that was that second alert that I got during the morning. It said that they were also experiencing issues. They encouraged to call 573-882-7201 and press 4 for dispatch. And so that was their recommendation in order to avoid that issue. And so again, this really affected all across Boone County. So that's some information that we have about that. This is the longest fiber cut in Boone County jurisdiction that the jurisdiction has ever experienced, as it lasted around 13 hours. The disruption also affected local hospitals, public safety agencies, and government agencies, according to the release. So there was also delays with patients being connected to clinicians as well at MU Healthcare as well. And so there was lots of other information about that. Some of this information coming into us from KOMU, where again, there was some vandalism that caused these different disruptions. So again, KOMU News from the NBC affiliate reported on this earlier today. And that was from some of the different information that we got from that news article, explaining a little bit more into exactly what happened. We also know that in the local area overnight, around the same time, a little bit before this happened, that there was also a couple of different stabbings that took place in the Columbia, Missouri area. I guess the positive news was that even with the phone lines being down, there was no delay in emergency services during both of these stabbings that took place.
Absolutely. So, recently, just moments ago, Jake, as you mentioned, emergency services 911, again, the police department, the number 311, all out of service in the area. Again, 811, not out of service that we know. So, again, if you wanted to dig holes in the area, call 811. Make sure you weren't digging around plumbing or around a wire. Again, perhaps you still could have done that. But again, for the emergency services, again, you would think one of the most important ones, 911, out of service, police department. So, again, a number of issues. You mentioned some issues with, again, hospital phone line connections relating to that, again, relating to emergency medical services. So, Jake, for the folks at home, myself included, who may not know, what exactly is 311? Is that sort of adjacent to the emergency services contact number?
Yeah, so I believe that is the national number for calling for a non-emergency, non-emergency police phone call.
Yes. So 311 also out of service around the same time as 911 was out of service. So 311, a non-emergency line for reporting crimes. So again, just a few major developments on that. And
Yes.
again, just quite shocking, Jake. You mentioned around this time a couple of shootings in the area. So perhaps some criminals in the area had caught
Uh,
wind of it and taken advantage of it. What else can you tell us about this?
Yes, and so that was actually a stabbing that took place, and it was before the outage had taken place. Just shortly before the outage, there was a stabbing that took place, and so it appears to be unrelated. And again, because it was just before this took place, it did not have any effects with emergency response time to that specific stabbing. But I guess a little bit more information on that. Well, actually, first, just to clarify, the 311 is that would be for different people who get stranded on the roadways, who need assistance. Um, Out on the roadways. And so that would be another one of the reasons for calling 311 for those who are stranded out on the highways. That's another purpose for 311. And so again, that line was also down. But I guess a little bit more information into, so again, one man is now in custody after there was a stabbing that took place here in Columbia. Columbia Police Department arrested Darrell Smith, 33, from Columbia. And so the stabbing took place around the 4500 block of Rice Road is where the location of this was at. Police officers responded around 2:30 to a stabbing that took place, and that Smith had assaulted an adult male victim with a knife during a domestic disturbance. Again, this was around 2:30 a.m., where the phone lines went down around 3:30 a.m. So police responded to this about an hour before that actually had taken place. The victim was taken to the hospital and he was in stable condition. Smith was arrested on charges of first-degree domestic assault and armed criminal action. We also know that the Columbia police are still investigating the information.
Absolutely. So a rough night for Columbia, Missouri. Of course, this stabbing took place. Again, you mentioned, Jake, this actually happened before the outage with emergency services, with 911, with 311, and the police department, among others, being out of service. Again, this major fiber outage. But again, this incident, this stabbing, this major crime happened before the fact. So again, it wasn't really connected in this case. But again, we do see this from time to time. And this is one of the hazards, as you mentioned to me moments ago, Jake, that sort of comes into play, sort of the longer things. Again, the longer this sort of thing would go on with, again, emergency services being unavailable in the way that you would ordinarily contacting them. At some point, again, criminals, perhaps less savory characters, would catch wind of this and just possibly take advantage of it. So, again, very fortunate, not abundantly clear how long it lasted, but you mentioned the longest one on record, again, in Boone County, certainly in the greater Columbia area. So,
Uh,
certainly
um,
a major.
Yeah, that 13 hours was the time frame with this one. This particular outage lasted about 13 hours.
Right.
And so again, it started around 3:30, and then the second, and so that's the other thing, is there was actually another stabbing. And so let's go ahead and get the information on the second one. So again, the one that we were just talking about on Rice Road that happened around 2:30 in the morning, that was the second one. There was another one 2 hours before that. So the first incident happened around 12:30 a.m. on the 500 block of Claudel Lane. One person was taken to the hospital with injuries, according to a Columbia Police Department's spokesperson. The severity of the injuries is unknown. And then there was that second stabbing that took place 2 hours later. So again, there was two different stabbings. One was at 2:30 a.m. in Columbia, and then the second one was around 2:30, 2:40 a.m. That was the one that we were talking about a little bit ago. And then about an hour after that happened, after both of those had occurred, then the phone lines went down. They were out of service until around 3 or 4 o'clock this afternoon, and that included non-emergency phone calls as well. So emergency and non-emergency phone calls were disrupted too. So again, there was a couple of stabbings that took place in the early morning hours this morning, and then a couple hours afterwards, that's when police lines went down. So that's the latest information that we have on that local news story here in the Columbia, Missouri area. And so again, the good news is that some arrests were made with that, and that at least with the second victim, or the second stabbing incident that took place, that the victim does seem to be in stable condition. Again, no word on the first victim from the first stabbing that took place. And so that's really all the news that we have here in Columbia. Again, the good news is that the police lines have been restored after the vandalism took place with those here in Boone County. Now we'll move into some other breaking news stories that we have, including some updates on the ongoing war in Iran.
Absolutely, Jake. My understanding some major recent developments on the conflict in Iran, which of course we've been following extensively here on GWP. If you've been catching all of that, you certainly want to tune in for that and stay tuned again if you haven't started already. But we cover that often again as it is a major topic in national events, certainly in foreign affairs in recent times, a major, again, event. So you'll have to stay tuned for the ongoing coverage of that on GWP News Weekly at the top of each week and at the end of each week with GWP Weekly Recap, a shorter, more condensed version of that, a sort of more laid back thing, a great way to send things off into your weekend. So if you have not, you will want to check out both of those to stay updated on all of this. The best thing that you can do is subscribe to the Great World Productions YouTube channel. When you do that, you can ring a little bell to receive notifications whenever we post, whenever we go live. There will be a few different options there, but again, that is your best option to stay up to date, and you've got to do that because you do not want to miss out. So, Jake, we have some recent developments, I understand, on the Iran conflict. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, the U.S. military, so this update came from CBS News. The U.S. military said that two commercial vessels safely transited to the key waterway there in the Strait of Hormuz on Monday. This comes from Project Freedom, the initiative announced by the president. We also know that Iran fired missiles at the ships, but they were protected during the operation. And so we also know that 7 Iranian small boats were destroyed as they were trying to interfere with this operation of bringing the two commercial vessels through. So again, the U.S. military helping to get these commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz after the closure that has been taking place, that blockade that we've been talking about with the Strait of Hormuz. That, of course, is what's caused oil prices to surge. Gas prices have also gone up significantly as well. And so that is what caused this Project Freedom from the president. And so during the operation, again, 7 different ships did go down or were at least destroyed by the U.S. military trying to protect, because again, those 7 Iranian small boats were trying to stop that we're trying to stop those commercial vessels from making it through. And so that's kind of what happened. So, yeah, if you want to look at it this way, we had these commercial boats that were trying to come through the Strait of Hormuz. They were being attacked by Iranian ships. And then the U.S. military came in from the other side, and then they were able to stop those ships from making it. And so, again, those two commercial vessels were able to make it through because the military was blocking them from the line of fire from Iran.
Absolutely. So, some major recent developments on that, Jack, and sort of goes to show, as we've sort of reiterated time and time again here on GWP, there's a real question about, again, things going on in Iran. We know that we've recently had a ceasefire brokered, but again, ever since the time, again, from the very inception of this particular ceasefire, from the time that this agreement was brokered, there's been a real question as to if it will really hold. Again, some question as to how stable things really are in practice in the region. And part of one of the objectives of the United States, something supposedly that Iran agreed to in this ceasefire, was the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. We now know that, again, we still sort of see this double blockade around the area. So, again, not exactly, it would seem, 100% stable, 100% adhering to the terms of the ceasefire. And fortunately, we've had still some of those commercial vessels that needed to get through there or were able to get through thanks to being escorted by the U.S. military vessels. Again, in the process, Jake, as you mentioned, 3 Iranian naval vessels were sunk or were taken down in the process of that. So again, things not abundantly stable in the
Yes,
region,
7.
at
Yep.
least not yet. 7 different ones. Again, we initially said 3, but now we know 7 different Iranian naval vessels taken down were
Yes.
sunk around the Hormuz Strait. Again, for the purpose of getting these commercial vessels through. Again, for the necessary imports, exports, and all the rest that ordinarily go on in the region, which have been strained extensively by the conflict in the region. Of course, a number of effects of that. Again, we're seeing perhaps the most directly, as we've mentioned in the past, in terms of what you pay in the pump, because so much oil, of course, is exported from the Strait of Hormuz, again, from these Arab Gulf countries, which has been blocked off, again, has really been made difficult in recent times due to the conflict in Iran. So that sort of has certainly jacked up oil prices, has influenced other things economically. So a number of effects on that front, and certainly there is intent, certainly plenty of reason to look for an end. Not yet a clear end in sight, it would seem, again, with a relative instability across the region, as it would appear now that Iran, again, not quite adhering to the terms of our very recent ceasefire established, particularly on the Strait of Hormuz. Jake?
Yes, and so we will have to continue to update you on everything, all the latest information that we get as that news story develops. But again, tensions certainly boiling over today there in the Strait of Hormuz with the exchange in different fire that we said that took place there. And so that is for our third top news story. We also have a fourth breaking news story. We've actually got four breaking news stories. This will be our last news story that we'll be covering unless we get some new breaking news that comes in before we end the live stream. But our fourth breaking news story, a little bit less, I guess, breaking news, but I mean, definitely some big developments that we've had over the weekend is Spirit Airlines has completely shut down after failing to secure a $500 million government or a $500 million government lifeline.
Absolutely. So we know that again they have struggled oftentimes. We hear many of these different stories, many of these different tales about people who went on a flight with Spirit Airlines and sort of the quality of their air travel, the experience that it is. So not exactly a secret that they were struggling on that front. But again, we see this from time to time, again, with major businesses that, again, have existed for a long time, but again, are on the verge of really going under, on the verge of bankruptcy. Again, from time to time, again, they can apply for this government assistance, these government lifelines, sort of their last ditch effort to avoid their ultimate bankruptcy and ultimately leading to their demise, entire closure. So certainly, we've seen a fairly extensive struggle on that front in relation to Spirit Airlines with their reputation. Certainly, in recent times, almost everyone has heard one story or another about a person's experience with Spirit Airlines. Again, how one thing or another ran amok. Jake, I can't say that I've got much personal experience with Spirit Airlines, but I knew from a business standpoint that they were struggling. Again, not terribly surprising that they were on the verge of that degree of bankruptcy. Also, again, unfortunate for them, of course, to some degree, naturally. Corporations are people. There are people in them that, again, have their own interests. We wish everyone the best, again, that they can do well and prosper. But again, that isn't always the case. It's a difficult thing to do. And that was the case, again, one of the many. It would appear not succeeding in this case is Spirit Airlines. So, again, not difficult to see why the government wouldn't extend that, again, that lifeline with Spirit Airlines. Again, long term, for some time now, they've been struggling with their reputation, struggling from a business standpoint, and now, as a last ditch effort, they have applied for this lifeline from the government. This assistance is $500 million. So, again, quite a hefty request. Again, it probably would help them out. It's possible that they would be able to turn things around. But again, that just wasn't going to happen at this point. Jake, have you had any personal experience with Spirit Airlines?
No, I can't. I can't say that I've had any experience with them, although I do know that I've heard very similar stories of what you mentioned. And again, the bailout failed is kind of what took place here. And so just let's talk about some of the key reasons for why the shutdown took place, there was a severe strain with a 70% plus surge in jet fuel prices following the war in Iran. So that was one of the effects. They also had many effects before that. The war in Iran, I guess you could just say, put the final nail in the coffin, so to speak. But there was a lot of other nails in the coffin that came before that. Again, the outbreak and or the outbreak of war in Iran is the most recent nail, I guess, in the coffin. But there were several other issues. There was years of mounting debt, failed mergers, and intense competition that left the airline with no cash reserves to continue operating. We also know that the that Spirit Airlines has faced two bankruptcies in just the last 2 years. And so that's been obviously a problem. They've had years of mounting debt, as well as we mentioned. And as the as it was mentioned by NBC5 Chicago, the airline ran out of the runway, prompting the CEO to state they had no visible path forward. The collapse grounded all flights, leaving thousands of travelers stranded and forcing the layoff of roughly 17,000 employees and contractors. So again, definitely this airline is the definition of running off the runway.
Absolutely, would appear so. Running off the runway indeed with Spirit Airlines. So perhaps they would have been able to stay afloat a little bit longer if it weren't for the conflict in Iran, or that certainly didn't help things, again, with the surging prices in jet fuel. But Jake, as you mentioned, it would appear that that was just the final nail in the coffin. Again, they were already struggling somewhat just in the past year or so. They declared bankruptcy not once but twice. There are, of course, different chapters, different degrees of bankruptcy, but certainly not a positive thing and not indicative of profitable business performance when within a year you see bankruptcy declared twice. So certainly not terribly surprising on that front. And any of the folks at home with more experience with Spirit Airlines, perhaps you were on one of the last flights with Spirit Airlines now that they're shutting down. We'd love to hear what your personal experience was flying with them, what you took from it. If you'd like to do that, you can put that in the comments below the video if you want to do it. Again, not much time to do it while we're live, but possible to do it in the live chat, so you can do that as well. Again, a number of great options on that front for reaching out, and we truly would love to hear your experience with this now bygone airline. Jake, any closing remarks? What say you?
I believe that's all that we have on that particular story. And then I guess we'll give an honorable mention breaking news story. The National Weather Service national radar has gone down. So that's something else that we're trying to figure out right now. In fact, let's just go ahead and we will go ahead and I'll just kind of just show you what we've got going on here with that. So, of
Absolutely.
course, this is the same radar picture here, and so I believe everybody should be able to see my screen here. Is that correct,
I
Isaac?
believe so. I can certainly see it. So the folks at home should be able to see it as well. You can give us feedback in the live chat if you're struggling to see it, if you're struggling to hear us, anything of the sort, or if you'd still like to share your experience. Again, running out of time, but if you'd still like to share your experience with Spirit Airlines in the live chat, you can do that quickly right now, Jake. So, again, it's showing us the radar now from the National Weather Service. You say that you're having issues with it. Current radar not available. Again, in our recent severe weather coverage, again, you often use this radar on much of our weather coverage. I can't say that I've ever seen this before. Jake, have you?
Yeah, I can't say that I've seen it say this before as well. I think there's been times where it's been a little bit slower, or it's had to update a few times. But it appears that right now that we don't have any national radar at all. And so it's important to understand if we go over here and I click on this here, we've got national radar and then we've got local radar. Sometimes you'll notice I'll bounce back and forth between two different tabs. One of them will have the national radar that gives you like the whole picture of what's going on, and then we have the local radar. And so I'll go to different ones here. And so normally I have them on two different tabs, but again, right now the national radar doesn't work. But if we go to the different local radars, we can still get the same information that we would be getting from the national radar. It's just we're only able to go from one region at a time. We're not able to see a national view of what's going on. So that's kind of the important distinction when it comes to that here. And again, part of the reason why we have this radar pulled up is if we were to need to do another live stream for severe weather coverage, it doesn't appear that we're going to need to do that, as our severe weather is pretty far to the north of our region right now, but we are still dealing with some storms across that region. We are going to be potentially going live later this evening. As we mentioned, there is now a slight risk for severe weather. Just kind of a brief update in the weekly news segment. We did a weather update, and that was pre-recorded a few hours ago, and so there's been some updates since that happened. Really, the only update is that the Storm Prediction Center we now have a slight risk for everybody here in the viewing area. So now the entire viewing area is under a slight risk. Earlier today, it was just our northern half of the viewing area. So now the entire viewing area is under a slight risk for severe weather, 2 out of 5 on that severe weather scale from the Storm Prediction Center. So we will keep you updated. We will go live as needed between now and midnight. Anytime after midnight, we don't do live streams. So if severe weather were to occur between 12 a.m. and 8 o'clock in the morning, we will not have a live stream during that time. But anytime up until midnight, we will go live as needed for severe weather coverage, and that's only if necessary. Otherwise, we won't go live for that. So, but we'll keep you updated on that. As of right now, if I had to just guess, I don't think that we will have severe weather between now and midnight. I think it'll be after midnight. And so if we were to see any of that after midnight, you'll want to make sure to have your phones on so that you can get those life-saving weather alerts in the event that that does happen. But as of right now, I don't think it's going to be a really big concern, but we will update you here on GWP. But I believe that we are going to go ahead and end this breaking news GWP live stream.
Absolutely, and you will have to stay tuned for that continued coverage in the event of severe weather. You have to tune in for that. Or on GWP Live as well for our severe weather coverage. You will not want to miss out on that for all the latest across our listening area. Again, certainly stay tuned for that. Don't want to miss out. We thank you all for tuning in. And with that, we conclude this broadcast. Until next time.
I'm Jacob Fulmer.
And I'm Isaac Hedges, host of GWP Live. From all of us at GWP Live and Great World Productions, good night and God bless.